Hello everyone, my name is Denise and today I'll be talking about this book, The Body Keeps the Score. This is part 4 of the review. Yes, I'm going on and on and on making a series of reviews, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it because it's an awesome book and there are many notable parts. Okay, so just let me dive right into it. First, let's look at the case of Helen Keller. So Helen was 19 months old and had just started to talk when a viral infection robbed her of her sight and her hearing. Now deaf and blind and mute, this lovely, lively child turned into an untamed, isolated creature. After 5 years, her family invited a partially blind teacher, Anne Sullivan, to Boston, their home, to be Helen's tutor. So it took 10 weeks of trying to connect with this wild child before the breakthrough occurred. It came as Anne spelled the word water into one of Helen's hands while she held the other under the water pump. So later on, as you know, Helen became a famous writer. So she wrote this about herself. Before my teacher came to me, I did not know that I am. I lived in a world that was a no world. I had neither will nor intellect. I can remember all this, not because I knew that it was so, but because I had tactual memory. It enabled me to remember that I never contracted my forehead in the act of thinking. Okay, so Helen's tactual memories based on touch, could not be shared, but language opened the possibilities of joining a community. So from then, she was able to talk freely with other children, to feel at home in this great world, in her own words. Okay, so this is an amazing story, okay, and it's also amazing on many different levels. One part of it is that there's always this debate that should counselors or psychologists with their own past history of trauma be allowed to administer counseling to others who are traumatized? Are they too damaged to do the job? Or like in this case, in Helen Keller's case, where there's Anne Sullivan coming in who's herself partially blind, she was able to be patient enough to wait for 10 weeks before the breakthrough, to be creative and try many ways. Maybe it's in part due to her own blindness. So to answer the question about the trauma thing, has a previously traumatized counselor so-called made herself, or because of the trauma become unable to administer good therapy? Actually, I'm of the opposite view. The opposite view being that you must at least have suffered some form of difficulty in life. It doesn't have to be super traumatic. Some semblance of what trauma is like, to be able to be a good therapist, because then you'll be patient and you'll not treat your counseling clients as some weird alien, but someone who reminds you of yourself. So that's where the empathy comes in. I know that's a very broad statement, and some of you might not agree, but also I think that it also depends on the nearness of the trauma. For example, if a person has been traumatized long time ago, childhood trauma, and has since lived a fairly blessed life, then the trauma will remain as a figment of the past, and the empathy will also be waned. But if trauma is something that is more recent, then the person will be better able to provide the empathy that's needed for the client to feel understood in the room. Okay, so anyway, this story is to show that Anne Sullivan, who is partially blind herself, was able to administer the awesome education to Helen Keller, and that nobody is unteachable. You really have to be patient to find the right method to teach them. Okay, next up is this study. I keep citing this study because I heard it long time ago, but now I can quote exactly who's the researcher who did it. It's this guy called Penny Baker. I think he's a psychology lecturer. So let me see, what is it? Let's trace the very beginning. He began by asking each student to identify a deeply personal experience that they found very stressful or traumatic. He then divided the class into 3 groups. One would write about what was currently going on in their lives. The second group would write about the details of a traumatic or stressful event, and the third would recount the facts of the experience, their feelings and emotions about it, and what impact they thought the event had on their lives. All of these students wrote continuously for 15 minutes on 4 consecutive days while sitting alone in a small cubicle in the psychology building. So what they found was the group that had written about both the facts and emotions related to the trauma benefited the most. They had a 50% drop in doctor visits compared to the other two groups. Writing about their deepest thoughts and feelings about traumas had improved their mood and resulted in a more positive, optimistic attitude and better physical health. Okay, so this is the experiment, which is awesome, because a lot of time I'm always trying to expound the virtues of journaling, brutally honest journal, the kind like at the beginning of writing, you said I'm going to destroy this incriminating evidence at the end of my journaling session. Okay, so it's that kind of brutally honest journal, right? So this study is something that I want to remember all the time. I mean, always from now on, so that I can quote it to my clients and encourage them to journal, because brutally honest journal actually relates to better emotional and even physical health. So that's awesome. Okay, next up, let's take a look at page 290. The capacity of art, music and dance to circumvent the speechlessness that comes with terror may be one reason they are used as trauma treatment in cultures around the world. So James Pennebaker, the researcher from the beginning, and Anne Franks, a San Francisco dance movement therapist, did an experiment. They split a group of 64 students. 1/3 was asked to disclose a personally traumatic experience through expressive body movement for at least 10 minutes a day for 3 consecutive days, and then to write about it for 10 minutes. A second group danced but did not write about the trauma, and a third group engaged in a routine exercise program. So over the 3 following months, members of all the groups reported that they felt happier and healthier. However, only the expressive movements group that also showed objective evidence, better physical health, and an improved grade point average. Okay, so this is interesting. I never ever thought about this, and I always, in my mind in the past, when I heard people trying to combine dance or martial arts with therapy or journaling, I was so bizarre. But I think that's where it comes from this research by Pennebaker, that you do some bizarre action to express your trauma, then you write. It's actually quite therapeutic. So that is something I would really love to go into. Given my background, I used to do taekwondo, was a taekwondo fighter, and also I used to do ballet when I was a little girl. I love dancing. So one day I really look forward to incorporating and melding these two talents together, if it can be therapeutic to my clients and also to myself. Okay, I still have one last bookmark. Okay, this is talking about EMDR, one kind of therapy method. So the beauty about EMDR is that you don't have to let the therapist know exactly what you're thinking. You just have to recount the trauma in your head and then follow the procedure that comes next. So when Bessel was training to be a therapist, he was practicing with one of his fellow students, and it's quite funny because the student didn't want to share the details of that. So he was actually resisting talking about the details, and then but Bessel was good. He completed the whole procedure and went to complain to his lecturer. And strangely, although that friend was not so cooperative in Bessel's perspective, he actually felt the benefits of EMDR nonetheless, although he's thoroughly annoyed. So it's quite funny, because traditional talk therapies always only work if the therapeutic alliance is strong and you've got strong positive feelings for your therapist, but EMDR can work in spite of that. So that's magical. Okay, so this is what the lecturer told Bessel when he complained about his uncooperative fellow student. You know, Bessel, maybe you need to learn to put your voyeurism tendencies on hold. If it's important for you to hear trauma stories, why don't you go to a bar, pay a couple of dollars on the table, and say to your neighbor, I'll buy you a drink if you tell me your trauma story. But you really need to know the difference between your desire to hear stories and your patient's internal process of healing. That's awesome, because I think back to the front part, when you've been traumatized before, can you then be a therapist, a trauma therapist? And I said yes, right? But there is this tendency to want to listen to people's trauma. I know we are complicated creatures. One part of you will be, oh, don't tell me that, I'm going to get nightmares. But there's still going to be a part of you that, please tell me your trauma so that I won't feel so alone in my trauma. I need to get a kind of validation, a mirroring, so that I'm not all alone in this world. Okay, well, if you really want that, I think there's a better setting for that. You go for group therapy. But as a therapist, if your client is not ready to share and you're just being inquisitive for the sake of being inquisitive, that's not very nice of you. Okay? Mental note to myself. Okay, that's the end of today's video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, kindly press like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thank you so much, and God bless.